Okay, everybody, this is my spoiler review of the White Lotus Season 3, Episode 4, Hide or Seek. I'm going to break my review again down to 5 parts, going over all the character storylines, but let's start off with the Ratliffs. So we see Tim is now fully addicted to these pills. He has been at his breaking point. He's been trying to go through it with this addiction now, with this pills taking him out of it, but then we'll see by the end of the episode he has to actually really face again what's actually happening in the States. But while this is happening, you see that Saxon's making Lockie another protein shake. His ultimate goal here is to get his little brother laid and to mold him into a version of himself. And you see when Saxon starts picking on Piper, Lachlan smiles at Saxon, but then feels sorry for Piper and looks at her sad. And it's just perfect for this character. And it was explained even further when he was getting his posture fixed by that therapist that he is a people pleaser and he is adapting to who he's around and he's constantly stuck in the middle between his siblings. He always is in an identity crisis, sticking to the identity theme of the season. Now Victoria will come in and ask if any of the kids took her pills, and Piper has a great line. "You don't have enough lorazepam to get through 1 week at a wellness spa?" That made me laugh out loud. And meanwhile, Tim at one point opens his robe accidentally and flashes the kids, which also made me laugh. But it cuts away to that monkey statue at the end of the scene where they're in those positions of speak no evil, hear no evil, see no evil, which have had great people commenting on my videos pointing that out in that episode. One photo with them doing that pose with the 3 kids. So spot on. Now on Greg's boat, we'll see Timothy just runs right to Victoria's bag and takes not just one pill, but takes a whole bottle with him. And he'll play this off later saying, well, she always loses things. So this is really full-time addict behavior. What's also interesting is Piper will tell Lachlan she's going to move to Thailand after she graduates and join the meditation center. And she wants to tell her parents about this tonight and will need his help. That's why she so badly also want him to go to dinner. And it's revealed that it was a lie about the whole reason of them going out there wasn't for the interview with this monk. It was for her to see if she'd want to live there. And he says, what about me? So he's hurt by this, Lachlan. It goes back to his identity crisis, also melding into a codependency he kind of has on his siblings. And this part of it feeling kind of betrayed here by Piper will then directly lead him to falling into the worst influence for him, which is Saxon in this episode. I also think the timing of Piper saying this is super important because it's set up later in an episode with Timothy where he's talking to Greg. And he says to Greg, heard someone say anyone who wants to move to Thailand is either looking for something or hiding from something. And then Greg says, what about you? Are you hiding or are you seeking? Going back to the episode title of Hide or Seek. He says, I'm just on vacation with my family. But you never know, Timothy says. So that makes me think that he doesn't even realize, but he's already going to be in a situation probably where he's going to end up like Piper staying in Thailand. And I'll probably be excited to hear Piper saying this. And that probably will shock her when she reveals it to her dad later on that he's like, yes, let's move to Thailand. You should stay in Thailand after you graduate. Now, Parker is grossed out by the older man with the younger woman on the boat. She's so uncomfortable on this boat in general. And we also learned that Timothy's grandfather was the governor of North Carolina and his father was a very successful businessman. So there must be pressure and a way of living that's very conservative and harsh on him growing up, explaining why he is that way and has that kind of demeanor, especially around Saxon. And he says about his father, thank God he's dead. And then he says, thank God both my parents are dead, kind of freaking out the people on the boat he was talking to. But he's saying that because they would be insanely infuriated with him in this scam he's a part of and him getting in trouble, and explaining how much their expectations of him probably were. And you'll see Piper will go to her dad and says, thanks for taking us here and giving up your phone, which is funny because he's giving up his phone for other reasons, not the one she's thinking. And Timothy starts kind of caressing her face, which is a little weird. And he's like, I love you so much, while he's all pilled out. I'm not looking too far into that yet, but we'll see. What was interesting about Greg on this boat, at one point, it feels like it's shot like Greg is watching now Chloe with Saxon, but the way they angle it, it seemed more obvious to me now that he's watching it as Chloe's part of a con working for him, and that maybe Chloe's next target is Saxon to get into that family and their money. And it's going to be funny when he realizes that they're not going to have any money anymore. And meanwhile, through all this, Lachlan and Saxon are with girls on the boat, and Saxon's really pushing Lachlan to branch himself out there with them. And this is where Lachlan will choose to stay with Saxon on the boat instead of going with Piper to dinner that night, upsetting Piper because he was supposed to be there when she said this news to her parents about Thailand. So when we go to the dinner, Victoria says, that was a convention for con men and tax cheats. And Piper says, I'm sure you cheat on your taxes, Mom. And she goes, well, not so badly that we have to leave the country. I died laughing because they're about to be in that situation where they're going to have to leave the country. And she says, I wouldn't be surprised if some of them were actual killers. We know this is the truth in Greg. She says, you think they only exist in movies? They're very real. I feel like that's also Mike White saying that to us. And she says, lucky your father is a Boy Scout, which is not the truth. So this is just something that's going to send Timothy into more of a whirlwind than he already is in. So he goes and demands his phone back from Pam, and his phone's just continuously going off the hook still. Calls his lawyer. He learns that Kenny cooperated with the feds, and the lawyer wants him to plead guilty. Says he's already behind on the step of moving things around, and that the feds can take whatever they want, including the house. And the lawyer's like, if we play ball, maybe just focus on money, you'll just serve a few months in prisons. And he says he would rather die. So it's kind of like that mindset too of people who jump from office buildings when they get fired because they can't see themselves living a life like under the life they've already attained for themselves. They'd rather die. He's like, what am I supposed to tell my family? That we are poor now? That I'm going to prison? So it's his worst nightmare. And what's interesting is then he looks up at the security office where Gaitak, who is the worst security guard in history of security guards, left out a phone. And you'll see that Pam grabs his phone back and she's like, hopefully we won't need that again. Timothy says, I won't. So I think that was also truth in there too. And I don't think he's planning on looking at that phone again now that he knows his options and where they lead to prison. Do I know what he's planning to do with that gun? Absolutely not. I'd love to hear your guys' theories on that. Why did he grab that gun? Now we'll see the full moon party's about to begin on the yacht, and you see Lachlan there with Saxon and the girls. At that moment at the end of the episode when they show that, I just want to say I audibly yelled, come on, because I felt like they had set up last episode that we'd be seeing this full moon party the next episode. Instead, they give us the pre-party to the party. So really felt stretched out here. And I'm going to get more into that, my full thoughts of the whole episode and why it really frustrated me in parts. But we'll keep going with this specific storyline. So let's go into Chelsea and Rick. She says to Rick things happen in 3, robbery, snake show. And she said this could be Final Destination type stuff like death is coming for me talking about this boat. And she's like, maybe we shouldn't get on it. It's even scarier now seeing she gets on that boat again. But when she goes back on the boat later on, she is without Rick. There's a big moment here. My favorite part of the episode is when Amrita runs into Rick in the lobby and says, you have touched my heart, and I hope you will hear me when I say you are not stuck. You can let go of your story. You can escape karmic cycle. Find peace in this life. I have hope for you. What's interesting about this moment is that when she walks away, Rick is also very touched by her because he has that look on his face, and then he puts the mask back on and goes back into not facing those demons when she walks away. But it's all about that identity theme here of this season and what we see of ourselves and perspective and how we can change our own stories and stop giving ourselves these stories that aren't good for us. So I think that it is getting through to him in some way, in a therapeutic way. Slowly but surely. On Greg's boat, we'll see that Chelsea will say to Rick, are you ever going to let me in? It doesn't feel good. I am at the end of my rope. So she's finally really putting her foot down with him, and saying the end of my rope is giving him a little bit of a spook to scare him that she might leave him. And he opens up finally. He's like, we're here because the dude who murdered my father owns this hotel called that. And that's totally, like I said, like a Sawyer-like story from Lost. He says this guy is in Bangkok. That's why he wants to go to Bangkok. And he says his father was in Thailand doing good, trying to stop an American from stealing locals' land, which is obviously this hotel owner. And then he says one day he disappeared and was never found. And Chelsea says, is this like the bit you killed my father, prepare to die? Talking about the Princess Bride reference, which was great too. And he says, I don't know. So she hugs him, but this is huge progress for Chelsea, seeing him finally open up to her, not be so mysterious. It was weird how they edited the end of their story though, because then the next time we see them together, they just get off the boat and Chloe just kind of continues this conversation over. So it felt a little redundant, but she's like, what's the point? I wish she had said this line in the scene we just saw them in. So it felt like it was like rehashing it in a different way, which felt weird. He says, the guy ruined my life from day one. He doesn't have to answer to me. She says, don't do this. I got a really bad feeling. So it just felt like this part of the conversation felt like they didn't just have the conversation on the boat earlier. It was just weird. But she lets him go to Bangkok, and she goes on the boat alone, so that can only mean trouble for both of them, in my opinion. But weird flow to the episode with their talking for sure. Not Mike White-like. Now let's go to everything with Mook and Guy Talk. Now, Guy Talk will ask her on a date for tomorrow night. She doesn't give him an answer, and then she asks about the meeting and is excited like he's going to get a promotion to be this bodyguard in Bangkok he was telling her about, and he's like, that's probably not going to be the case, and it isn't. And Fabian's like, you're nice, but you have to protect the hotel. And he says his coworker has some ideas. And what is the coworker's idea? He's like, I got us a gun, so go to the gun range after work. So we'll see if Guy Tak actually goes and watches Mook in her dance later on, which I'm sure he will, but he should probably really be practicing at the gun range. And then he's like, tomorrow, don't forget our first date, okay? And then he says later, when he's distracted by her coming in her outfit to dance at night, where he's stupidly so distracted he leaves the gun out, and he says to her, tomorrow, don't forget our first date. And she just says, okay. I was like, huh? Like, when did that just become where she's down for the date? So, again, weird inconsistencies with how conversations go early in the episode and coming back later around, like you missed something, or it just was the same talk but a different answer this time, and you're like, well, why? I just didn't understand why all of a sudden she's okay with like directly going on a date with him. I thought that was really strange. So I wasn't crazy about Mook and Guy Talk's story this episode. Now let's go to everything with Belinda. So with Belinda, we see that her son Zion is a day away, so he's coming soon. And she's still sensing someone is in her room, which is really eerie. And she will Google Tanya, and she learns here that she's dead. So I was right about that too, that she didn't know exactly that Tanya died yet. I also like they sneak in the Google results for her death that someone already bought the filming rights for her story. But you see that there's another article about husband wanted for question in Italy and he refused it. So that's Greg Hunt. And we see he really was in the BLM, Black Lives Matter, just kidding, Bureau of Land Management. And that's where it gets scary, because on Greg's boat, he will tell Chloe later on he can't go to the party tonight. Something important he has to deal with at home. So he knew it was going to have to do with Belinda. And that's when we saw he was looking up Belinda and finds a picture of her son, Zion, and her on Instagram, which is really scary. So what is Greg planning to do with Belinda? And you see before that he stared her down in the hotel. So you can see Belinda too. Like, she's got to be definitely even regretting saying hi to him the last episode, because now you're on his radar that you know too much. But again, I think Belinda will be okay. In that first episode, she made a offering to something that's supposed to protect you, that shrine. So I think that is going to protect her in the spirituality of the show, and it would be too obvious. But I do think she will tell her son about what's going on with Greg at some point, because remember in the first scene we see of him in the show that takes place in the future, he was like, please protect my mom. So I think he knew someone was obviously after his mother. So I did really like Belinda's stuff in this episode. Let's go to the three best friends storyline to wrap this all up. You'll see Jaclyn in the beginning of the episode calls her husband Harrison. Remember, Harrison's 10 years younger than her. She's leaving voicemails. He's like, oh, maybe you're on set, but there's no answer. So not the best feeling when you're away from somebody you love and you're not getting answers for that long. And then she'll tell Kate and Lori about this at breakfast, that Harrison is kind of AWOL and she's been sending texts and really getting no answers. So they kind of look at each other, and she quickly changes the subject to, let's do something fun today. So she doesn't want to face this fact that's bothering her, and perfect day to just distract herself from it. And who do they rely on is Valentine. He's like, he knows a place. So Valentine's sketchy. I'll admit in my previous review that he obviously was there distracting Guy Talk about going to a fighting match, because he's definitely in on this robbery that happened in the store, which I've also learned from my comments many a times. It's not shoplifting, it's a robbery. But we'll see later on when they're at the club and they meet his friends, one of them has a giant snake tattoo. So right there, you know that is the actual robber, and they were all together in on this because he grabbed the snake charm. He likes snakes. That's what he's going to steal. So it made total sense. So Really kind of cool how they hinted at that, and it's kind of revealed slightly through a tattoo. But when Valentine takes them to the first place, they end up like Jaclyn was going to say, where they go from one pool to another. And Jaclyn's immediately recognized, which is she's excited about, but she'll quickly realize it's an old people resort, which was pretty funny. That felt like that kind of old White Lotus humor we'd see more of that I'm missing this season. So it was nice to see that. And before they're going to this club with Valentine later on, he brings them to town. And he goes away for an hour, which is sketchy, but they get super soaked. And I wasn't really crazy about this scene. I think it was showing you that this is them actually being in Thailand and not just being in their bubble of this fancy White Lotus resort, seeing the world as it is there. And I just felt like, though, when you're looking at a scene like this in their story this season, it feels like you're just watching like an Eat, Pray, Love movie. Like I just am like, okay, this really isn't that great, this story. It's probably, I can say, one of my least favorite stories on White Lotus today. I won't say the worst, but it's down below. It's disappointing for me, and I really hope there's some kind of screwball here in the next episode with them that makes this more interesting, because it's going at a snail's pace and it's so predictable beat by beat, and it feels like it's wasting 3 great actresses. But you see when Jaclyn's at the club with Valentine's friends later, she has a line, "We aren't dead yet, we can still be young and hot and fun." So this is a big theme too about that group, like I was saying about especially Lori feeling that way about aging and that fear of aging in people as they get older and losing that youthfulness and that beauty of youth. And you see that Jaclyn's dating Harrison, who's younger than her too, because that's also part of that mindset of holding on to that. So it's a nice kind of moment with the meat there in that part of the story, but again, just very, very weak story for me this season. So overall, this is probably, I'm going to say, my least favorite episode of The White Lotus ever. And it's really disappointing because this is the halfway mark of this season. So there's only 8 episodes. So I thought by now we would get cooking a little bit more. And it really sucks because you're going to see comments that are like, well, this is still, a table setting episode. But we've been saying that since episode 1. This is 4 episodes. This is 4 hours of my life. Like, come on. Like, every other season had way more meat and interesting things happening by this time. So it felt weird to me that it clearly looked like we are going to do the full moon party story this episode. Instead, it's like we got an episode that was just wedged in before it, which is so frustrating. And then we get the tease for it. And it makes me wonder that I'm sure next episode is going to be great, but that we're going to look back and be like, you could probably skip from 3 to 5 and you probably won't miss much. You can probably call your friend and they'll tell you the 3 little things you learned in this episode and you're caught up. So that's where I get frustrated. And if you're going to do that where there's not a lot of conflict, you got to have some funnier moments here, and they're just not there. They're few and far between the seasons. So really frustrated. It's going to be a 7 for me. It's not awful, and there's a lot of things I liked about it that I've pointed out, but for White Lotus standards and Mike White standards, this is like the first like red flag episode I've ever had of the show. I'm like not crazy about it, and it's worrying me now about the season. So it better deliver next episode, but I still have faith it will. Let me know what you thought of it down below. I love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment, try to respond as many as I can. Hit that sub button so you don't miss one of my reviews of White Lotus. I'm also reviewing Severance, and I do celebrity interviews as well. And of course, I got Handmaid's Tale around the corner. I'll see you next time.